Now there's a cool little story behind this painting. So a student of mine that I follow on Instagram, who normally does a lot of floral paintings, and it's definitely a strength, is trying to make himself better, which I love, by pushing himself and getting himself outside of his comfort zone. So he is going out in plein air painting. And I promise you, nothing will get you better faster than plein air painting, because in my opinion, it's the hardest type of painting. I've been doing it for a while and it still humbles me all the time. So when I saw him post this painting and say that he struggled with it, I wanted to surprise him and paint it myself, to be able to show him what he did right and what he could do to improve. And I actually took him one step further and did a whole Patreon tutorial on this. So if you want to see the whole full version of this painting in tutorial form, that is on my Patreon page, which I have a link to in the description below. All right, let's jump on to the first reason, which is they struggle knowing where to crop a scene. Now I know this can be very hard and very overwhelming, especially if you're trying to paint from life, you know, where you take a photo and you just got all this great stuff in a scene and you just don't know where to cut it off. So for this example, this was the scene. And there's a lot of great things in this scene. So what I like to do to figure out how to crop it is I go through and just kind of create an inventory of what I like about this scene. I like the bridge. I like that. That's pretty interesting and cool. I like the creek here. That's really interesting. I like the dappled light in the creek. And I like the vibrant greens in the trees. So now I know what's interesting to me in this scene. And this could be different for anybody. It's just important for you to be able to acknowledge what you're finding interesting so you can narrow it down and get more focused on what you want to highlight. So I like to choose a star of the scene. You know, what is going to be the main focus of this scene, because I can't give the same amount of attention to everything. And a lot of times what you want to be the star of the scene is going to take up the most space on the canvas. You know, I could crop this where the trees are the star of the scene. I could crop it so the bridge is the star of the scene. I could crop it so the creek is the star of the scene. And again, this is going to depend on you, the painter, on what you want to do with the painting. There's no right or wrong answer. There's only right and wrong to what you want to do and what you are trying to achieve with the painting. And what I hope to do with my advice is give you the tools to better realize the vision that you want to do. So I find the creek the most interesting, so I crop it so the creek is taking up the most space. Now a little side tip with this is it's always good to be kind of extreme with your decisions. You know, I could crop it like this and the creek is definitely emphasized, or I could crop it like this and the creek is very emphasized. Whenever you make strong decisions like that, most of the time it produces a more interesting composition and painting. Now I like this because I just personally find the creek more interesting. I also get to keep a lot of the other things that I liked about the scene. I still got my dappled light in there. I still have the bridge in there, and I still have some of the trees. So now if we look at the students, you can see that they didn't really emphasize one particular area. You know, the bridge, the creek, the trees, they all got kind of the same amount of attention. Again, think of it like a play or a movie, and you have to choose a star. And when you choose a star, they're gonna get the most attention, and all the other characters are going to help support that star and what that character's story is. And the story for this painting, for me, is this river. All right, reason number 2, students struggle with landscape paintings is they don't really choose a focal point. And choosing a focal point is very important because it's going to help you make decisions throughout the painting. Now, a focal point is kind of what you want your composition to drive the viewer's eye towards, or the area that's going to catch the viewer's eye the fastest. A lot of times this is the area of highest contrast. You know, an area where the painting's darkest dark and lightest light meet, creating a very high contrast. Our eyes are just naturally drawn to that. Or sometimes it's where color complements meet, or an area with, you know, a harsh, crisp edge. So the first thing I like to do is look throughout the painting for, you know, the darkest darks and the lightest lights, and see if there's any natural places where those would meet. And the one that draws my eye right away is this bridge. You know, this bridge is very bright. It's drawn a lot of attention to itself. And there's also this very dark shadow underneath. And that dark shadow touching that bright bridge, I really like that contrast, and I want to make that my focal point. It's also good because the bridge is at the top of the painting and kind of further back. And so I have my creek leading the viewer's eye to that focal point, which is nice. Now to draw even more attention specifically to that one area, I'm not gonna make the whole bridge in light. I'm gonna put most of it in shadow. That way your eye's even drawn more to that one spot on the bridge. You know, don't be afraid to change things like this to better the composition and to better drive the viewer's eye to the focal point. All right, quick side note, struggle with color mixing, I offer the color mixing video for my Foundations of Oil Painting course for free. If you want to check it out, the link to get that is in the description of this video. All right, the next reason is that they don't block out the big shapes of flat color at the beginning. It's very helpful when looking at a scene to squint your eyes, get rid of detail, and just see the big shapes. And think about painting it as if you were painting it with cutout paper. And you got to find these big flat shapes of color, and getting the whole scene in like that is going to help you see the scene as a whole and see all the color and value relationships, which is very important. And when I do this, I'm blocking all this out with thin paint because I know I'm going to be building more paint on top of this. Again, coming to the idea of painting it with cut out paper, you know, I'm starting with big, simple shapes, and as the painting progresses, I'm going to be adding smaller, more specific shapes on top of it as I go. You know, this is working big to small, but I also like to say it's working easy to hard. It's a lot easier to figure out these few simple big shapes and then use those to help you figure out the smaller shapes and colors and values within them. If you just jump into like one specific area and just try and develop it all to completion and then, you know, move to other sections of the painting doing the same thing, it's gonna make it difficult because you're not gonna have anything to compare with each other. And you're not gonna be thinking of the scene as a whole. And a lot of times if you go about doing it that way, it can become disjointed and colors and values just, they don't work together. All right, reason number 4 is they don't simplify enough. Not every part of a landscape painting needs to have detail. Just like I was saying at the beginning, there's only one star of the painting. Everything else needs to be helping support that star of the painting. So a lot of the supporting elements of the scene aren't going to be getting the same attention to detail as the star of the scene. For example, these trees behind the bridge, they're not that important. I mean, it's important that they sit in the background and they add depth to the scene, but I don't need to go in and put a bunch of detail. I don't need to put in a whole bunch of tree trunks and get like every little small shape that I see in the photo. It's okay for this to be painted simply, and the fact that it is going to be painted simply with not much detail at all is going to help sit it in the back. You can see in the students, they did a good job at finding shapes and thinking in terms of shapes, which is great. They are definitely on the right path. It's just I feel like they found the same amount of shapes and level of shapes throughout the whole painting. I wish they would have found less in the background and more in the foreground. All right, reason number 5 is a lot of students don't get in key colors and values at the beginning to help them figure out the colors and values as they go. For example here, pretty early on, I got some color notes in for the vibrant greens and the reflections of the water, along with a lot of the warmer, lighter values and colors in the rocks. Because up until this point, most of the painting was relatively dark in value, and I wanted to kind of counteract that and put in some warm, lighter values, just enough to have as a reference. So as I put in other color values, I can see kind of how they compare to something as warm and light as these values. Again, coming back to working easy to hard, do things that are gonna help you. You know, sometimes I'll put in the brightest bright of a painting and the darkest dark of a painting pretty early on, so I kind of know the end points. So as I find new colors and values, I go, okay, where does it fall between my darkest dark and my lightest light? I have them on my painting, so I know the ends of the spectrum, and it helps me figure out where to put colors and values as I go. Reason number 6 is a lot of people struggle with developing form in foliage. Like when you have like a cluster of leaves or bushes or whatever, especially in photos, it's hard to make out any kind of definite form with these. So you kind of have to make it up, but still in the realm of reality of the scene. Like these bushes here that are near the bridge, I can't really make out, you know, defined light and shadow shapes to create form from the photo. So I just kind of make it up using what I know about the lighting that's happening in the scene. So I know like most of these bushes are going to be in the shadow, except for maybe the tops are catching a little bit of the light that's coming in and hitting the bridge. And I first just kind of think of them as if I was painting like a big mound of mashed potatoes, and I'm just kind of thinking about the basic form with simple shapes. But once I have that and the form established and kind of the light and shadow figured out, then I can go in and start adding a bunch of details and making them, you know, more interesting and making them look more like bushes. But getting that form up first is very important. I talked about this actually in depth in another video where I did a cityscape and I had some bushes and I compared it to some students that did it, and it seems like all of them struggled to find form in the bushes or the trees because it really wasn't showing in the photo. It's one of my favorite videos. If you haven't seen it, I highly suggest it. I'll put a link to it above right now. All right, and the last reason is a lot of people just don't use color to create depth in their landscapes. This comes down to atmospheric perspective, which is as things get further away from you, certain colors drop out, first yellows, then reds, and you're left with blues. That's why things can get cooler as they get further away. I mean, you can just see the difference in the greens in the foreground here opposed to the greens in the background. Same goes with the rocks. The rocks in the distance are a lot cooler, a lot less saturated than the rocks in the foreground, which are a lot warmer, more saturated. This can be very difficult to pick up on in photos. So a lot of times you might have to, make it up or push it more to make the painting work. I didn't go exactly by the photo for these color changes. I used what I knew about atmospheric perspective and color to enhance the scene and to portray what I wanted more. Same goes for detail. As I'm developing the painting, I'm definitely trying to put in more detail in the foreground to bring it forward more and have less detail as I get further back. Up front, there's a lot more smaller shapes, whereas as you move further back, the shapes become condensed, become more simple, bigger shapes. All right. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. If you want to see what I'm painting on a daily basis, you can follow me on Instagram at Forza43. I'm Chris Fornatero, here telling you to go get painting.